Rescuers call it the worst case of human neglect they'd ever seen. A blind, disabled teen found starving and writhing in pain in a North Bend home.
That case prompted a $27 million claim today against DSHS for allegedly not protecting the teenage girl. King 5 investigator Linda Byron has the exclusive story. And we want to warn you that the photos and content may be upsetting.
We were called by King County Sheriff's Office for a welfare check.
We showed our commission badges and ID cards indicate they were there to do a welfare check for Heather Curtis.
The King County Sheriff's Office had received a report of child abuse.
I remember it like it was yesterday. It was one of the most horrible things I've ever seen.
I remember the smell. I remember the flies. I remember the dirty diapers.
But the couple who was being paid to care for the girl didn't want them to come in.
We asked where Heather was, and she pointed down the hall where her bedroom was. April actually physically stood in front of where Heather's bedroom was so that we weren't to enter it, and we said, we are going in there, and you need to move out of your way and let us do our job. And that's when we first laid eyes on Heather.
Opened the door and immediately had the smell of feces, and there were diapers on the floor, and there was feces on the floor.
There was, I thought, a child lying in the bottom of a bunk bed. She was so small and skeletal-like.
She was very small, like the size of maybe a 7- or 8-year-old, I would think.
Wailing. And a moaning and a wailing that I've never, ever heard. And the only thing I can compare it to would be a wounded animal.
I remember that clearly. It was 3 years ago. And
But unforgettable, because this is what the detective and firefighter saw. Heather Curtis wasn't 7 or 8, or even 9 or 10. She was 19 years old and weighed 68 pounds.
I still get emotional. Excuse me. I wasn't prepared to see that.
Heather was helpless, blind, quadriplegic with cerebral palsy. It's hard to even make her out amid all of the garbage in her bedroom.
We all thought that this was the worst case of neglect we'd seen on a person that was still alive.
Heather was 10 when her caregiver died, and Jeff and April Henderson took her in. They were paid by the state of Washington to ensure that all of her needs were met.
Sorry, that's hard to put words to, isn't it?
Yet firefighter Scott Foster was shocked at how April reacted as they watched Heather writhing in filth.
There was no love. She had no love or compassion for this young little girl. She was only mad because the child had taken the diaper off.
The neglect went back years. State records show the Hendersons took over Heather's care in 2003, and almost immediately complaints of negligent treatment began flooding in. In 2004, teachers complained Heather's coming to school without a coat. She isn't being bathed. She has bad sores. She smells of urine and feces. In 2005, complaints she has bed sores and smells. In 2009, she's chronically dirty, crying, missing hair. Her bottom is crusted with old feces. The Hendersons start keeping her home, and finally, by June 2010, take Heather out of school altogether. Records show that over the next couple of years, social workers visit, but they always give advance notice and never go into Heather's room.
A red flag would be when someone is brought out to one room when you're there to check on her. I want to see where this person lives, where they sleep.
It's not until Children's Hospital sees Heather in October 2012 that the state launches a full investigation into neglect. A week later, they send in police.
So what picture do these documents paint?
Horrific neglect.
Ian Bauer and David Moody were hired by Heather's new guardian to look into suing the state of Washington for handing over Heather to the Hendersons without checking them out or keeping tabs on them.
They don't require or force them to go through any training. They don't make sure that they're even capable of caring for Heather. They don't go and inspect and look at how they're caring for Heather. They don't do any of it but they start to write checks.
According to police reports, those checks, more than $4,000 a month, were the only money coming in to support the Hendersons and their 4 kids. They were both unemployed.
Heather was a meal ticket for the Hendersons. No one should ever treat another human being the way that they treated Heather.
According to court documents, when police found Heather emaciated and living in filth, Jeff Henderson weighed 500 pounds, and the family had plenty of nice belongings.
I was quite surprised. There was a big screen TV, there was laptops, and then I noticed a reptile collection.
An extensive collection of reptiles and spiders that were well cared for.
Heather was living in absolute squalor while the Hendersons were living a good life. DSHS was subsidizing the Hendersons' lifestyle. None of the money was going for Heather.
After all of that, the Hendersons cut a deal. They pled guilty to second-degree criminal mistreatment and were sentenced to just 9 months of home detention.
When Heather was rescued, she was on the verge of death.
Now, Heather's lawyers have filed a $27 million claim for damages against DSHS.
DSHS had its chance. They had its chance with her, and now we're asking the DSHS pay for private care for Heather for all her needs for the remainder of her life.
Her care will be extensive. Not only is Heather severely disabled, after being taken out of the Hendersons' home, her teeth were so rotten, she required 19 root canals.
That this is years and years of neglect.
Her rescuers believe Heather knows she's finally on the path to having the care she deserves. Scott Foster told her that as they wrapped her in a sheet and carried her to the ambulance.
Honey, we're just here. We're here to help you. We're going to get you out of here. And she smiled at me, and she'd been through a rough time, and she knew that she was going to get out of there.
The detective visited Heather 9 months after the rescue. She'd gained 30 pounds and was back in school. We made repeated attempts to reach the Hendersons, but never heard back from them. DSHS sent us a statement saying due to confidentiality, they can't comment on her case. But when they learn of abuse of a client, it's, quote, personal. And DSHS says since January 2013, the department has made improvements, increasing staff for conducting investigations and implementing an automated abuse system that provides one database for tracking complaints.